would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name is Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker, licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. I hope it's been a great week for everyone. I do apologize for the lack of shows this week. Today is the first new show of the week. I was always planning on taking Monday and Tuesday off, but then I caught something and it kind of ruined my voice for a couple of days. I appreciate those of you who are still out there sticking with me, delivering on a awesome interview today with Mr. Tom Cafarella, real estate investor in Boston, and we covered some great information. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this interview. It's a great one. I think you're going to get a lot out of it. All right, everyone. I'd like to welcome to the show Mr. Tom Cafarella, real estate investor from Boston. Tom, why don't you go ahead and take a minute and let everyone know a little bit about yourself?
So, like you mentioned, my name is Tom Cafarella. I'm an investor, and I'm a real estate brokerage owner over in the Boston market. And I've been doing this for about 10 years. I actually got started at the perfect time, right when the market was crashing in Boston, and now we're kind of all the way at the other end of the cycle. But to give you kind of an update of what I do, so my company, Ocean City Development, we do about 100 fix and flips a year. I have a 150-person real estate brokerage, and I own about 300 rental units.
Wow.
And that's kind of my business.
Okay. Now, and right now, and we're going to get into some pretty, I think, juicy details about how you sort of analyze markets and do things like that in terms of adapting, right? One of the most important things that folks need to realize about real estate is, while it can often be formulaic and it can work, if folks can't adapt and understand that markets change, that formula that's worked for you for 2, 3, 4 years may be the exact strategy that causes you to lose it all if you're not nimble in how you're investing. But before we jump into that, I'd love to get a little bit more from you on the first mistake you made that led you into real estate, where you were actually fired.
Yeah, I used to be very embarrassed when I would talk about this, and not a lot of people knew this story about me for probably the first 4 or 5 years of my real estate career. But now I actually enjoy talking about it because, as we were kind of hitting on before we jumped onto the call, it was not only the best thing that ever happened to me, but it really just goes to the fact that you really have to find something that you love doing, or else you're not going to be great at it. So when I was a CPA, I was an accountant, graduated in 2004, and went to work for a big firm. And pretty much the moment that I got there, I knew I didn't belong.
Yeah.
And I would go to the other people, my coworkers, and I would look for people that didn't like it because I thought everyone didn't like it. And what I quickly found out was I was probably one of the only few that, hated showing up every day and just, really hated that corporate lifestyle. So, I always wanted to get into real estate investing. My grandfather was a successful landlord in the Boston market. And, I got fired because instead of doing my work, I would sit there all day and I'd be on Bigger Pockets and I'd be researching about how to be a real estate investor. So, I couldn't do it because it was something I really didn't love. Yeah. And I wasn't passionate about it.
Yeah. And I think the big takeaway, for folks in my audience, and particularly because of feedback I've gotten from folks, is that, you can suffer a setback, or you can choose the wrong path towards what you think makes sense, and I'm in almost the same boat you are. My grandfather was a big real estate guy as well. And I took the same advice. My parents were advising, well, go for this, do these other things. But you need to understand that even though you may have a moment when you're feeling a little damaged maybe because someone who you work for who's in a place of authority tells you we don't want you around anymore. That doesn't mean that you need to fall into that and let that hold you down. You just need to realize it's just a question of picking the right direction. All you did was make a wrong turn, and there's absolutely nothing to stop you from backtracking a couple of steps and picking the right path. So, and it's great that you were able to find that. And I just want to reinforce for the listeners that you can do the exact same thing if you find yourself in a position in your life where you don't feel like anything's going right and you've made the wrong choices.
Well, what I didn't realize back then, I mean, I'm big now on, I'm sure you're familiar with the DISC personality test, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how it really, impacts what career path you should be in. And when I got fired, I thought in my head, wow, I'm a failure. Everybody should be able to do this and I can't. But the reality was it just wasn't fit for my personality. And once I got into a career path that was right for my personality, it took off. And now I work just as much as I did, at my corporate job, but it doesn't feel like work because I like what I'm doing every day.
Yeah. Well, that's what makes the difference, right? That's what helps you bring the energy every day, even when some of those days are maybe a little less fun than the others. Yep. All right. So let's jump in, and I guess let's go with a little history first, because as you mentioned, you kind of came into it almost, you said 2004, right?
2004 was when I graduated from college, and
okay.
I went into the accounting world. But I really started about maybe 2007, 2008, seriously getting involved in real estate investing. And like I said, pretty much the day I got into it was the day the market was crashing.
Right. And so give us a little insights into what you looked at and decided were the right ways to move in your market in Boston.
So at that time, probably just like your market, most of the markets across the country were kind of moving in parallel just because of the financial crisis.
Right.
There were so many short sales and there were so many foreclosures out there. And I'm a licensed real estate agent as well. So the primary part of my focus of my practice was doing short sales at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And there were so many people in need of that assistance. So, quite literally, my phone was ringing off the hook, and every single thing I did on the marketing side was working when I was targeting for short sales. And you talked about in the beginning, how you have to kind of shift your focus. I thought that's how the market always was.
Yeah. And
so when the market thing shifted back and, my cheese was moved again, it was kind of a shocker for me to get into a more normal market. But I was just processing short sale after short sale after short sale. And the good deals that came across my plate, I was buying.
Now, were you teaming up with anyone else? How are you following through on those purchases?
Yeah. So I have two partners, and I still have the same two partners that I started with. And it's the father and son. And in the beginning, the father was funding all of our deals.
Okay.
And so I was really lucky because I was young. I didn't have the capital. And so, he was the capital behind what we were doing. And our job was to, get the great deals, get them under contract, and then get them renovated and resell them.
Okay. Okay. That feels just, it's not quite, I mean, you've got a partner in there, but it almost feels like wholesaling a little bit, where you're finding that right deal, you're getting it into a position where it's ready to go, and then you approach your money person.
Yeah, and some of them we did wholesale.
Okay.
So whenever I get a good deal that comes across my plate, I look at it like I can make money in four possible ways. I can either wholesale it if it's a deal I don't want to purchase. I can fix and flip it if it's a deal that I like. I can buy and hold it if it would make a good rental. And if the seller, really wants more retail, then I can list it. And depending upon what makes the most sense for the seller and what makes the most sense for me, that's what we determine would be our best exit strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, also, we were accumulating a lot of rental properties because it was just such a great time to buy multifamily properties in the Boston market as opposed to today, where in your market and mine, I mean, I don't think there's anything that cash flows in your market, right?
So, it's an interesting thing. Obviously, it's always bad form on one of these things to refer to things we talked about not in the interview. But one of the things I noticed that when we were chatting via email was how you brought up that multifamilies aren't really flowing for you. And here, absolutely, single family residentials, if you're buying in any of these major areas in Silicon Valley, you're not going to cash flow unless you're putting way more down than the typical amount. And in that case, your return on investment is not going to be as awesome. Down around 3%, I think 4% with the last report that we covered on the show. The only ones that come close at all in my market are tending to be multifamily units. Duplexes, tris, and quads are tending to do a little bit better. So it feels like the dynamic on my coast is a little different from your coast. But still, it's still tough. You're still not making a lot of money, but you can at least cash flow with less money in it in terms of what you're having to put up front to buy the property.
I'm surprised that anything is even cash flowing because your market is not super different than mine. I know you're in a really hot market. I mean, so you can buy a 2-family in your market and make a couple bucks a month still?
It's hit and miss because whenever I go in and if I'm negotiating, it's math, right? So I really love the house. I want to put drapes. It's none of that. I go to the person selling and I show them my numbers and say, it's an investment. This thing does not flow. There's no way I can make this work. And oftentimes that will work. The downside though is in my market, you're going to have to do that probably a couple of dozen times before you get into a contract. So it's still very difficult.
Right.
And so I think the difference may be in the negotiating you're having to go through, right? In terms of just trying to drag that price down a little bit.
Yeah, and I think I might have been spoiled a little bit going back to when I first started. You could throw a dart at any multifamily, and not only were you cash flowing, but you were getting like 20, 25%, cash on cash.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can remember days when I was doing the show back in 2010 when I would randomly pick a property on the MLS, any random property, assume that we paid list price, and it flowed over and over and over. And it was crazy.
And the great thing about our markets is that when you do buy and that downturn, not only do they cash flow a lot, but the appreciation comes back gangbusters when the market starts to go back up.
Now, and that's a great point for us to sort of segue into what do you do now, right? We've talked about how things were. It was great. We've had a chance to reminisce and think about how great the old days were. What about now with things far more competitive? How does your strategy evolve to face that?
Yeah, so right now in the greater Boston market, we are only picking up rental properties in just the when we come across something that's just a home run. And so right now for us to accumulate and continue to buy rental properties, it has to be a home run to even cash flow.
What does that equal? What does a home run equal?
A home run equals, for me, I like to pay 100 times what the monthly rents are. So for example, if the property is renting out for $3,000 a month and it's in rent-ready condition, I like to pay $300,000 for it. And to me, that will guarantee that I'm going to have some cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
And right now in Boston, you have to be in front of the right seller in order to do that. And it's virtually impossible to do that unless the property is off market and not listed by an agent.
So your strategy is... I guess, so, and this is one of those things that we bring up a lot, finding where the least amount of footprints are, right?
So, yeah, for sure.
Okay, so in other words, reject the MLS, which is going to draw buyers like flies, reject the Zillows, reject the Trulias and the Redfins. So how do you get directly at those folks so that you're the only person having that conversation with that potential seller?
Yeah, so there's 3 ways. So everything that we do revolves around going direct to sellers, and there's 3 ways that we do it. We cold call, we mail, and we do internet marketing, which consists of Google and Facebook.
Okay.
And so when we're going and we're marketing to a seller, let's just say that we're cold calling them, just like you would prospect as an agent, instead of saying, let me give you a market comparison or, let me tell you how much I think your house is worth, we're saying, let us make you an offer. And so for us, the way that we're able to still buy 100 deals a year, it makes sense to flip and getting them at a discount is that we're doing this in such huge volume. So we know that the 90% of sellers are never going to want to sell to an investor. And it doesn't make sense for them to sell to an investor, especially in this market.
Right.
But what we're looking for is the 10% of people that can't list their house for whatever reason. And it could be because of the condition. It could be because they need a really quick sale. There can be multiple reasons why it will make sense to sell to an investor, but we have to prospect to literally hundreds of thousands of people in order to get 100 that are willing to sell at a price where I can still make money.
Right. So so you're cold calling. I'm interested in that because I'm not a huge fan of cold calling. I like to call what I do when I do it warm calling.
Yes.
More because I'm filtering out. I'm not just throwing that net out and doing the old style Haynes directory reverse directory thing where you're simply calling every single house within a certain square block area or zip code or whatever. Do you do any of that, or are you doing true cold calling where you're just going out there and dialing every number that's in an area?
Well, we don't do it by area because by default, a lot of the people can't sell to us. So, for example, in a specific neighborhood, if someone has maybe an 80% LTV
Mm-hmm.
and I need to buy their house at 70% LTV, I'll make sure that I don't call the person with the 80 LTV because I can't even have a shot at buying it.
Right.
So what we start out with is we build a database. We have a database, but like if we were to go into your market, we would start out by building a database of the people who are more likely to sell to an investor. And typically speaking, those people have lived in their home for over 10 years. They have 50% LTV or less. They have an assessed value under a certain amount, because once you start to get into high dollar numbers, those people are less likely to sell to an investor. And then once we build that database, that's who we're prospecting to. And it is a completely cold call, meaning that they've never heard from us before,
Right.
except possibly online or maybe mailing, but it's not somebody that we have a prior existing relationship with.
Right. Okay. Well, good. So you're directing your calling at least towards folks where if they do say yes, you've already got that first question answered of whether or not it's even a possible deal for you.
Correct. And so we know the type of properties that we like to buy. We know the type of people who like to sell to investors. And we just want to be in front of them when they make the decision that they're considering a sale.
Okay. And it's interesting that you mentioned the multifamily part. So do you find that through these efforts in Boston, you're focusing more on single family residentials than in multifamilies?
Well, no, because in the multifamily space right now, the hot thing is turning the multifamilies into condos. So
Okay.
There's been a big shift in the Boston market over the last 10 years of people wanting to live in the city. So when I grew up, I'm not that old. I'm 35, but when I was growing up, everyone wanted to move out of the city and into the suburbs.
Right.
And now everybody wants to move into the city. And Boston specifically is really tight on zoning. So first of all, there's not a lot of land to build on, but even the land that there is, it's really difficult to get anything done. They don't really want you to add a lot of units. So what people are doing is they're taking these 3 families and 4 families and 2 families and turning them into luxury condos, and that's something that we do. So the highest and best use for a lot of these multifamilies is turning them into condos, and that's another reason why it's very difficult to cash flow on them.
Yeah, and you bring up something that's interesting because I'm seeing the same phenomenon on the West Coast, where in LA, right near Beverly Hills, actually, a giant, not giant, but a rather considerable apartment development just got sold to a builder that's converting it into luxury condos. So it's never going to end up being rentals. It's going to be, it's not even going to be full on condos. It's going to be relatively short-term rentals, I guess. Okay. So the whole condo short-term rental markets are growing in LA, and we're starting to see hints that might happen up here. But it's interesting that Boston seems to already have some momentum towards that whole conversion from apartments to condos.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, and there's actually there's a lot of media coverage on it because there are people who have lived in these cities for years and years and years, and they've been renters and they feel like they're part of the community. a lot of them are getting displaced now because developers are coming in there and they're turning them into condos, and they're not renewing these leases. So a lot of these people are being forced to move out of areas that they've lived in for their entire lives. So there's a lot of different socioeconomic things going on related to it. And I don't know where the trend is going to go in Boston. If it's going to continue to have people move into the city, which I wouldn't want to go. I live in the suburbs, but again, I'm in the minority now. So.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. And it's funny. It reminds me of New York in the 70s when that's exactly what was happening. Tons of conversions of apartments into condos. And I don't know if you have heard the interview we did with Francis Greenberger, but that's kind of how he built his, $1 billion industry. So maybe I should schedule a time to have another interview with you in 20 years as the billionaire real estate guy in Boston.
So people around here always reference what happened in New York because a lot of people feel like it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know. I can't say where. I don't like to make long-term predictions like that because there's so many different variables involved. But most people do think that that's kind of where we're headed.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's one of those things where it's not even a question of what you want to do. It's a question of, you just mentioned how it's really difficult in Boston to get things done in terms of creating more housing units, whatever it is you want to do. So it's the market responding to available resources and what you can do with those resources, right? If it makes it impossible for you to do this other thing, well, then you got to do this thing.
Yep, and that's, like you said, that's the only way that you can basically add more units for the people that live and work in Boston. So, again, it's interesting.
All right.
So, how much longer do we have here? This is the question that I ask everybody, and I'm always curious about their opinion. I mean, the market's on fire right now, and you've been in the business longer than I have. How much more legs do you think we have with this upturn?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I think what we'll do is we'll take a quick break right now. And then when we come back, we'll try to answer the question, how much time do we have left? So don't go away. We'll be right back. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right. Aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. All right, welcome back. And as promised, Mr. Cafarella and I are going to try to answer the question, how much time do we have left? And what's funny is that was a question I was going to ask you. I like to try to anticipate things, right? And sometimes I get too caught up in the minutia of it and the various little details. I've been pretty good. I have a pretty good history of being able to estimate what's going to happen in relatively near term, 6 months to a year. And okay, so obviously I'm here to interview you, but we can have a give and take here on what we think. I had a conversation with someone who wanted to list their house yesterday and wasn't sure whether or not they wanted to list the house. And the conversation evolved into a review of a lot of the things we've talked about on this show, where so much of what happened in the last downturn, all of the outcomes, right? I don't want to get into the details of 100% loans, 120% loans, excessive debt, yada, yada. Just what it has produced, where it has left us, right? Where has this bus dropped us off? And it is all very, very similar to where we were last time, just before things went absolutely nuts. And the other reality is last time it took nearly a decade to get us really hosed, right? Because a lot of the goofy things that were going on started in about 1999, 2000, and then ramped up and hit us in 2007.
Yep.
The problem is that what made it possible for that to occur was a lot of other success-related things in other economic stuff. And today we have a less robust economy that we're sort of living in. So my concern is that whatever time was needed last time would be compressed this time before we reached a critical tipping point. So in terms of how much longer do I think this is sustainable? I think it depends on what bad thing happens that starts off a general panic, right? Will it be pension funds that aren't being funded, and the fact that Illinois now has to dedicate 100% of its taxes just to paying pensions without paying a teacher, fixing a road, or a fireman or a policeman? And that's just one example, right? Tons of other states are not far behind Illinois. So is that what does it? Is it the fact that the stock market is at an all-time high, and a lot of people are kind of shrugging their shoulders saying, well, why is it at an all-time high? Does that do it? Because then that feeds the other thing, right? If stock markets go down, well, what are pension funds invested in? The stock market. Well, if that tanks, that means it accelerates that other problem. So, and that's just two things, right? There's so many other things. So I guess my actions speak for what I think, in that I'm in the process of selling my house, and I plan on then renting for a period of time. And
I like it. If my wife would let me do that, I would do that in a second.
You know what makes that a lot easier, Tom?
What?
Divorce is what did it for me. if I still had, I know exactly what you're saying.
If I want to pull this off, I have to end my marriage. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that is what I'm saying, Tom. That is the only solution.
Actually, you know what though? I think that if I did try to pull this off, that actually would end my marriage.
Yeah. See, So I'm with you. If I was in the same boat, if I was still married, I'd be in the exact same boat you're in. Now, luckily for me, timing is kind of working out here. One of my sons is about to go off to college. I have two more left that are seniors in high school. So I can rent for a year, and then I can be a little bit more mobile in terms of what I'm going to do. But I'll tell you, it's also one of those things where I don't expect to leave the proceeds from my property in the bank. My anticipation is to go to the markets that are booming, that a lot of the communities we talk about here on the show, where people are getting 15 to 20% return on investment. But also the other thing I'm looking for is a community that in the last downturn saw very little impact on their prices. So
where is that? What are the options you're looking at right now?
So my first two are not because of necessarily not having been hit a little bit by the downturn. And I've never been there, and it borders on an irrational love, but I'm hot to get out to Chattanooga and to Memphis. Memphis because it's been on a lot of lists for a lot of different reasons of great places to invest. And Chattanooga simply because they've done the whole fiber backbone thing for the entire city, and a lot of startups and high-tech companies are cropping up there that I think gives them a more vibrant downtown. So I'm coming up with investment rules that fit with that fact for that particular community. But yeah, those are two places I'm hot to check out.
So if you went out to Memphis, would you do like a Memphis Invest where they have everything kind of already set up for you and it's a turnkey rental, or would you try to do everything on your own?
See, I'm a big fan of acknowledging what you don't know and bringing in team members to fill those gaps. So my first thing on the ground would be to find local experts who know those markets. Typically, that means shopping for a real estate agent or a broker in that area that's a little bit more plugged in, someone that's maybe a part of the 20% of real estate agents that tend to be a little bit more on the ball and not just the formulaic folks that throw stuff against the wall to see what'll stick. But I'd probably start from home, doing everything I can online. And I usually start from the high level, just looking at groupings of where homes are renting that don't also happen to be in high crime areas. And then drill in from there and try to get a feel for those areas. Then I'd want to go out there and before I actually bought something, be able to physically visit it. And then when I'm there, decide whether or not I'm going to delegate this to a property manager or if I'm going to try to manage it myself. But I'd probably include property management fees and costs into my equations in terms of analyzing the numbers for those. Does that sound rational to you?
Are you familiar with Memphis Invest and what they do?
No.
Okay, so it's actually, they've made a huge business out of this, but it's a company based out of Memphis, and what they do is they provide turnkey rentals for the exact type of person that you are, which is somebody who's going to be taking cash from a market that went up like crazy,
Mm-hmm.
and then plowing it into a market that's more steady. And I know a lot about Memphis because I study the markets nationally as well. And so what they do is they do what I do in Boston, but they do it in Memphis. So they market directly to sellers. They get discounted deals. They renovate the properties. And then instead of selling them to an end user, they sell them to somebody like you, and then they manage the property.
Well, that sounds pretty good.
I would certainly, whether or not you use them or not, doesn't matter, but I would definitely look into them. They're called Memphis Invest, and I believe they manage over 2,000 doors now through this exact mechanism. And I like the idea a lot of going into another market. I've considered doing the same thing just because of I've actually considered selling off some of my rental units and putting the money into other markets that haven't gone up like how Boston has.
Yeah, and here's another thing, and I've mentioned this on previous shows, but the strategy discussions I have with investors that I work with locally, for instance, I have one investor who just loves San Francisco real estate, and we went over their returns over the last couple of years, and I said, you have $4 million worth of real estate that's working for you, and you're making an okay amount of money. But would you feel more comfortable if you could take those 2 or 3 properties, liquidate them, and then put them in a market where you would triple your monthly income? Because your money's just not working that hard for you. I mean, you're riding the appreciation wave, which is great, but the appreciation wave isn't a guarantee. And in fact, right now, the lowest concern on my list of things I want or what I expect out of my investments, if I'm talking about San Francisco, my lowest expectation is to get a lot of market momentum in terms of price. So if you take away that from San Francisco, what's the freaking point when you can go to some other markets and make far, far more than what you'd make in San Francisco, and you diversify. So if someone moves out, you're not suddenly out 50% of your monthly income. You're suddenly out 15% if you take that money and invest it somewhere else. So it's
the thing that scares me about markets like that is that prices can only go so high based on wages, right? So at some point, I just can't imagine that prices can continue to go up. I mean, they just can't. I mean, unless they start doing crazy loans again. But when the income doesn't justify the pricing over the long haul, I'm not talking over the next 2 years that people will be leaving San Francisco, but when there's other options across the country where you can get a similar type job, and all of those companies, a lot of the companies that are based in the Bay Area, some of them are moving to other parts of the country, and where you can buy $250,000 houses,
right?
So I just can't see in the long haul, especially with how mobile we all are now. I'm in my office in Boston, but I could be in Hawaii, I could be in Dallas, Texas, I could be anywhere and I could be doing my job. So I can't imagine with how technology is that there are going to be those areas that are just so overpriced over the long haul.
Yeah. Now, what about you? I've shared where I think things are going to go. What are your thoughts? I mean, you sound like you kind of agree with me. What do you believe the path holds for us?
Well, first of all, I believe that any market bubble, it's easy to call when you start to get overpriced.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of know when things feel overpriced, and I feel that they're overpriced right now. The difficult thing is, when does it end? Because a lot of times the irrational exuberance goes on for a lot longer than when it would make sense to stop.
Right.
So for me, if I had to bet, I mean, I think we're probably 2 years away.
Mm-hmm.
But but like you mentioned, it's not like there's one variable. There's so many different variables. There's mortgage rates, there's jobs, there's the political part of it. I mean, they're talking about doing so many. There are so many different bills that are being proposed based on taxes and based on regulations, and all of those things have a huge impact. They're talking about repealing some of the stuff in Dodd-Frank, and how does that impact lending? So it's like anyone who says that they know anything in terms of exactly when something's going to change, it can't be predicted like that.
Right.
But what you can look at is the basics, which is like rent to price ratio, and just like the stock market, when you look at the PE, the rent to price ratio is just too out of whack right now. So I think we're still going to keep plugging along for a little bit, but I am already starting to see and feel like there is a little bit of change in sentiment right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, this is just kind of a gut feeling, but, I think buyers are starting to get a little bit fed up. And I don't know if that's going to, directly impact pricing in the near future, but there does seem to be a little bit of more cautiousness than there was a year ago. But, we'll see.
See, now I think that's interesting because I've actually been observing that in the San Francisco market for about a year. So early last year, we saw the prices obviously just keep going crazy just because of the inventory problem. But what we saw was a decline in the number of buyers buying in San Francisco with an increase in communities further out. So sort of what I was calling at the time the mushroom effect, where right there at the core of the mushroom, no one wants to buy, no one wants to play the game. And it was encouraging because it's like, okay, great. It's maybe a larger number of buyers are getting that this is a bad thing. This is a no-win scenario. Maybe their memory of the downturn is still recent enough that they're like, I just don't want to feed this beast. So they're going north and they're going east and they're not buying where it's nuts. And then we saw that obviously equal prices going up in those other areas. The thing that's really shocked me recently, because we weren't seeing the crazy stuff, right? If anyone who's in real estate can remember when we were at a fever pitch and people were offering just ridiculous amounts over asking price, making offers sight unseen on properties. And just within the last few months, that's happening again. We're starting over on my end of the country. We're seeing more sight unseen offers going in without inspection contingencies, right? So in other words, they're just buying it. And that's the kind of thing that I have not seen in forever. In terms of just the crazy feeding frenzy that we saw last time. It sounds like you might be experiencing the same thing, but maybe just out of sync a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing that, I always ask people is leading up to the last crash, there were so many crazy loans and that was obviously, that predicated a lot of the bubble. Are you seeing any of that right now?
So, yeah. Which is concerning, right? So we've talked about how credit scores are being artificially increased, right? Last time we did this, people just said, hey, your credit score is low. Don't worry about it. Go stated income. So we didn't screw around with credit ratings. We just simply ignored them, right? Mm-hmm. This time, credit ratings are very important this time. So we can't afford to be seen ignoring those. So what we'll do is we'll artificially boost them. So last year, all of these things were passed to boost your credit score based on the fact you're paying your water bill or your power bill, which previously those wouldn't have had a positive impact on your credit score because they're not credit, right? If you stop paying your power bill, your power gets turned off. So now that's boosting it. And then as sort of proof in the pudding of that, in the most recent data for the quarter, magically big jump in credit scores overall. What a surprise, right? And then the other part of that is some of the crazy loans that we're seeing. We're seeing, and one more thing on the credit rating thing is, as of July of this year, so we're just a few days away from it, all collections complaints on your credit report relating to medical issues and a lot of other categories of things are going to just disappear.
Okay. I wasn't aware of either of those things. I wasn't aware of the water bill being a factor, and I wasn't aware of of the medical collections going away. So then that tells me that there are going to be people that are going to be able to enter the market that weren't before. So that's only going to fuel the prices even more.
Correct. And here's one that will really keep you up tonight, Tom. Let me ruin your Friday night sleep. So we did a show earlier this week or late last week where there are now 120% loans available. And the way you get this 120% loan is you need to be someone who has a student loan that you need to bundle with your mortgage. And then they will let you go up to 120%. And of course,
when did this start?
This just last week. I think they
okay.
So it's a brand spanking new thing. But here's the core problem is it does a couple of interesting things. First of all, I don't care how you get to 120%. There is no healthy way to secure a debt that's based on an asset that is worth 20% less than the amount of money you're borrowing, right? Because that's what they're doing. They're giving you a 120% loan based on this magical thing that, well, we're going to roll your student education debt into it. But what's also awesome is that it converts your student loan into a thing where you can't be, if you default on your student loan, they can't come and take your stuff, right? Roll it into this loan and they can come and take your stuff. It's suddenly no longer an unsecured loan. So it converts it into something that's more actionable in terms of foreclosures and those kinds of things.
Now, what happens in that case, though? Because with student loan debt, you can file bankruptcy and then you still owe the money.
Correct.
So what happens if you roll it into this type of loan and then you lose your property? Do you still owe the student loan portion?
No, because that loan disappears. The lender that lends you the money pays the student loan.
Oh man. That's a huge problem because anyone who has student loan debt right now that feels like, they're underwater just based on their student loans is going to want to go out there and get a housing loan just in the event that they want to discharge this debt.
Right. So that
could be a strategic play right there.
Yeah. And it gets worse, Tom. Mix it together, right? Who is the largest group that is burdened by gigantic student loans? It's the millennials, right? Well,
yep.
The millennials supposedly make up, and every headline tells you, wow, great, the millennials are coming out of the woodwork and they're finally going to buy. They are the largest buying block of buyers. So they represent the big chunk of the pie. And we also know that 50% of them never expected to have to pay back their student loan. We also know that almost 50% of them never made a single payment on their student loan over the last 7 years if they graduated 7 years ago. So there's all these crazy numbers relating to it. So these are going to be a highly motivated group of people to make this conversion into 120% loans for their properties. And then there's one other element. Another thing we've seen with millennials is they don't want to do the usual stepping stone purchase that we've seen in the past. So they don't want to buy that entry-level home and then in 3 or 4 years when they decide to change their family makeup or do whatever they're going to do, buy that 3-4 bedroom home. They want to buy the home they're going to stay in for 10 years. So what does that equal?
Yep.
Spend more money up front.
Yeah.
It all just makes
interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's definitely, if that, I almost feel like I need to just get off the phone right now with you and Google search this to verify that you're telling me the truth. But that's how crazy it is because that would just be such a big,
Yeah. And of course, remember where all these loans go, right? None of these lending institutions keep these loans. All of these are being put together in a way that Fannie and Freddie and the other government-sponsored entities will buy them in the secondary market and securitize them, right? So, and again, we talked a minute ago about the stock market. Well, what happens with securitized loans? They get bidded out in the market for people to invest in. What's the number one investor in these kinds of securitized loans? Pensions.
Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. Exciting times.
Sleep well, my friend. Sleep well.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So let's, obviously we've kind of gone into a slightly weird tangent that I think will make for some fun Googling for you.
Yes.
In terms of the first things you look for. So I'm Tom and I have lived through, I jumped in at a time when it was great to be an investor. I've lived through all of this growth and amazing competition that's happened. In your mind, what's the next thing that you'd need to see in your marketplace that would force you to shift your strategy a little bit? Is there something that you're kind of keeping an eye out for, thinking, as soon as this happens, I need to pivot and I need to do this?
Well, I think with all the stuff that you're talking about, with the 120% loans and people just being over leveraged in general, I mean, I think the next wave is going to be short sales again.
Yeah.
And so we're constantly selling property. So like I said, we fix and flip about 100 homes a year. So as soon as we see the pricing start to change in a downward way, I believe that the short sales are going to come back, full speed. So that's what I'm keeping an eye on, because when that happens, again, the marketing message that I send out to sellers is going to completely change, and the way that I buy houses changes. So one thing I didn't mention is that, from 2008 to about 2012, 75% of the deals that I did were either short sales that I was buying, or like a HUD property or a home path property. So I was pretty much exclusively buying from banks.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I will definitely be buying from banks, I'm sure, again, within whatever it is, the next year or 2 years or 3 years. And when that does happen, the mistake I made during the last downturn that I really wish I had capitalized on was I accumulated a lot of rental units, but I would have doubled down big time on the rental units, because I didn't understand. I mean, again, I was pretty young when all this stuff happened. I didn't realize that I wasn't going to be able to cash flow at some point, and now I've got the capital to cash flow, and I can't buy anything.
Mm-hmm.
So when it does, go down again, we're going to probably stop flipping and put all of our money into rental assets. And then, when the market appreciates again, see what happens there, either keep them or sell some of them off.
Okay. Now, have you seen pretty steady growth in the rents you're able to charge in your properties, or did you see fluctuations that seem to be linked to different market things happening in Boston?
What I don't understand about this is that rents have gone up along with prices.
Right.
And the last downturn that we had, people stopped renting practically because everyone was able to get a loan. So everyone was out buying houses, and rental prices were down in 2005, 2006, 2007 in Boston. And once the market started to crash, obviously a lot of people lost their houses. They went into rental units. But today, I don't understand it, because everyone's buying and everyone's renting, and both of them have gone up a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure how the two have kind of gone up together. I would have thought it would have been the same as the last time, where when more people were buying houses, rents would go down a little bit, but both rental rates and owner-occupied purchases have gone up.
Yeah.
So
I'm seeing the same thing here. And my explanation for it has been, it's simply that inventory has not reached equilibrium with demand. However you want to slice that up, since inventory is so low in both cases, it just means that the prices on the buying and the renting continue to go up at some rate.
The other thing I've seen, and the other thing that I think may be contributing to this, and I don't know how it is in your market, but quite a bit of the rent here is also subsidized. So
okay.
I've been seeing an increase in the subsidies, and I feel like that is also artificially driving up the prices, because if somebody had to pay $1,500 a month out of pocket, but now they're getting $300 a month subsidized, instead of it just staying at $1,500, it's now $1,800. So that person isn't even necessarily getting a break. The rents have just been pushed up.
Okay. Yeah, and in my marketplace, our rents, I don't think ever really took a hit. I think our rents kind of flattened for a while during a bit of the downturn, but overall, I didn't have any of my investor clients who owned rental properties. None of them were feeling like they needed to tighten their belt at all. It was one of those things where they just kind of held steady on their rents for maybe a year or two, and were then able to raise rents kind of at will. After that. So, in your marketplace, it would be interesting to look back historically and kind of see a graph of fluctuations in rent, because you'd want to know that, right? If you start to see a downturn, does that mean you want to migrate away from being as much of a renter? Or if you've already saw this coming and you've already done the math and you know you can weather that, do you just hold on and wait for the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, you know what, Tom? It has been an amazing conversation. I want to thank you for spending so much time with me. Before we say goodbye, I'd love for folks to know how to reach out to you. I know that you've got your website at tomcafarella.com. Are there any other places you'd like to point folks to get in touch with you?
No, that's the best place to get me at. I mean, that has all the information about learning how to become a real estate investor. And that's kind of what I've been focused on in the past maybe year to 2 years, is working with people out of state that want to kind of take the systems that I have in the Boston market and use them in their market. So you can find all the information on that at tomcafarella.com, and all my contact info is on there as well.
All right, great. Well, thanks again, Tom, for spending so much time with us. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure this has been great information for listeners to the show. So thanks again.
Thank you for having me on.
You bet.